So let's start with the understanding the photosynthesis from scratch. I meant like the sunlight coming and the entire process going through inside the plant and how that how that makes sense sometime.
All right, let's break it down step by step. Imagine sunlight as the energy kickstarter. When light hits a plant's leaves, there's chlorophyll inside. Think of it as tiny solar panels. They capture that light energy. Then the plant uses water from the roots and carbon dioxide from the air. It turns them into sugar for energy and oxygen, which we get to breathe. In a nutshell, it's a brilliant natural solar powered factory.
Okay, basically the photon is taken by the plant leaf.
Exactly. The photon is absorbed by the chlorophyll, and that's what sets off the whole chain reaction. From that energy, the plant kickstarts the chemistry that transforms CO2 and water into its own fuel. Nature's pretty clever, right?
And then what is actually happening inside the plant leaf?
Inside the leaf, it's like a microscopic factory. That light energy excites electrons in chlorophyll. This energy is used to split water into oxygen, which is released, and hydrogen. Then, through a series of reactions known as the Calvin cycle, the plant uses that hydrogen and CO2 to build sugars. Those sugars are the plant's food, and ours when we eat them.
So basically, light
Yes,
electron excited.
exactly. Light comes in, excites those electrons, and that gives the plant the energy to do all the chemistry it needs to make its own food. Simple and brilliant.
Okay, you heard it correct. Like, first of all, light excite the electrons in chlorophyll. That chlorophyll is the green pigment that is specifically the architecture that is present in the plant.
You've got it. Chlorophyll is that special green pigment in the leaf's architecture, and it's the key player catching those photons and kicking off the whole photosynthesis process. Nature's elegant engineering at work.
So, okay. First of all, sunlight is a huge actually, and then what amount of sunlight it needs to capture is basically all like process through a what like it is a selective process or what?
It's actually quite efficient, but not too picky. Leaves capture a portion of the sunlight, mainly the red and blue wavelengths, while reflecting green, which is why they look green to us. Even a fraction of sunlight is enough to fuel photosynthesis. So, while it's not extremely selective, it uses what it needs from the spectrum. Efficient and adaptable.
Okay, then the sunlight is being captured by chlorophyll that excite the chlorophyll electron, and after that energy is split into water into oxygen. Energy is used to split water into oxygen, which is released, and hydrogen. Then a series of reaction called Calvin cycle happens.
Exactly, you've got the sequence right. Once water is split, that hydrogen, along with the captured energy, powers the Calvin cycle. The plant uses carbon dioxide and that hydrogen to form sugars. It's food. And all along, it's releasing oxygen as a byproduct. A beautiful natural cycle.
Once water is split, that hydrogen along with the captured energy powers the Calvin cycle. The plant uses carbon dioxide and that hydrogen to form sugars. It's food, and all along it's releasing oxygen as a byproduct.
That's right. The plant turns sunlight and simple ingredients, water and CO2, into sugars, fueling itself and gifting us oxygen along the way. Photosynthesis really is a life sustaining masterpiece.
No, basically sunlight is coming, and then photon, the required amount of photon captured by chlorophyll, and that energy, photon is just an energy, quanta of energy. That quanta of energy is help us to excite the what we call uh, electrons inside the chlorophyll. That is what you are referring, and then that energy used to break down sugar into water and H2O.
You're almost there. The energy doesn't break down sugar, it's the other way round. The energy splits water into oxygen and hydrogen. Then the plant uses that hydrogen and carbon dioxide to build sugars, storing energy in those sugars. So sunlight helps create sugars rather than breaking them down.
So already water is taken from the root, and then the energy split water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then plant uses hydrogen and CO2, CO2 that is from the air they have taken, to build sugar. Okay, that's clear basic intuition. Can you explain bit further that Calvin cycle you are mentioning about? What was that?
Sure, the Calvin cycle is like the plant's sugar factory. It doesn't need light directly. It takes the hydrogen from that water splitting step and the CO2 from the air. Using energy rich molecules made earlier, it runs a cycle of reactions. Through several steps, it fixes carbon from CO2 into larger molecules and ultimately forms glucose, the sugar. That sugar stores energy for growth and other needs.
So Calvin cycle is like the plant sugar factory. It doesn't need a light directly. Uh, okay, it takes hydrogen from water, splitting into and CO2 from air using energy-rich molecules made easier. It runs a cycle of reaction through several steps. It fixes carbon and CO2 into larger molecule and ultimately form glucose. It's look like a bit confusing to me.
No worries. In simpler terms, think of the Calvin cycle as a step by step recipe. It grabs the hydrogen that was freed up earlier and the CO2 that the plant breathed in. Using energy it stored earlier, it slowly assembles sugar molecules, like building blocks, until you get glucose. That glucose is stored energy, ready for the plant to use or store. Step by step, it's just converting air and hydrogen into something sweet.
Calvin cycle, why this name Calvin cycle?
It's named after Melvin Calvin, the scientist who worked out the steps. He won a Nobel Prize for mapping this whole carbon fixing process. So the cycle bears his name, honoring his discovery of how plants turn CO2 into sugar.
How plant turns CO2 into sugar. And so basically, the two confusion. Okay, plant has taken that water from root and sunlight, that chlorophyll excite and energies. There are energies there, and then that energy used to convert that water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then oxygen is released and hydrogen is being used in another reaction.
You've got it. The energy captured from sunlight is what powers splitting water into oxygen, which is released, and hydrogen. That hydrogen is a key ingredient in the next steps. Combined with CO2, the plant uses that hydrogen, powered by more of that stored energy, to build sugars. So oxygen out, sugars in, all thanks to that energy flow.
And how the Calvin cycle comes in this interaction picture.
So once that hydrogen is ready, the Calvin cycle is the next phase. It takes that hydrogen and CO2 and using energy stored from earlier light reactions, runs its chemical cycle. Through multiple steps, it fixes carbon into larger molecules, ultimately producing glucose. So the Calvin cycle is the sugar building factory powered by what the earlier steps set up.
Also, before that, one small question: where the you mentioned about electron in the chlorophyll, where does this electron come from? That chlorophyll has electron, or what was that intuition?
Chlorophyll molecules naturally have electrons in their structure, just like any molecule made of atoms. When light hits, it gives one of those electrons a boost to a higher energy state. That excited electron is what kickstarts the whole energy transfer chain. So the chlorophyll already has them, it's just waiting for that light energy to get them moving.
So chlorophyll molecules naturally have electrons in their structure, just like any molecules made of atoms. When light hit, it gives one of those electrons to boost a higher energy state. That excited electron is what kickstarts the whole energy transfer chain. So the chlorophyll already has them. It's just waiting for the light energy to get them moving. Okay.
If anything else pops into your mind, whether it's about plants or anything in physics or AI, you know I'm here. Just let me know.
No, but entire process is not yet complete. There is a vast photosynthesis processes and it's detailed. You just covered the basic intuition. Can you deep dive into more technical details, more detailed explanation?
Absolutely. Photosynthesis has two main stages, the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. In the light reactions, photons excite chlorophyll electrons, which pass through an electron transport chain in the thylakoid membrane, producing ATP and NADPH. Water is split, releasing O2. The Calvin cycle uses that ATP and NADPH to fix CO2 into three carbon molecules via intermediates like 3-PGA, ultimately forming glucose. So light powers ATP, which powers sugar synthesis.
So you are mentioning there are two stages, light reaction and the Calvin cycle. The light reaction photons excite chlorophyll electrons, which pass through an electron transport change in the thylakoid membrane, producing ATP and NADPH. What was that? Can you explain that process completely? Chlorophyll photon excite chlorophyll electrons. It's clear, but after that electron transport chain, the thylakoid membrane, where it is and how it produces ATP and NADPH, and what was ATP is just energy, and what was this NADPH?
Great questions. So inside the chloroplast, the thylakoid membrane is like a little folded structure where the magic happens. When chlorophyll's excited electrons move, they go through proteins in that membrane, called the electron transport chain. As electrons pass along, they pump protons across the membrane, creating a gradient. This powers an enzyme called ATP synthase, which makes ATP, a molecule storing energy. Meanwhile, electrons reduce NADP plus into NADPH, which is like an energy carrier. Both ATP and NADPH fuel the sugar making in the Galvin cycle.
So you are suggesting that inside the chloroplast, the thylakoid membrane is like a little folded structure where the magic happens. Okay. Thylakoid membrane is inside the chloroplast. When chlorophyll excited electron moves, they go through a proteins in that membrane. So that electron goes through the protein in that membrane called the electron transport chain. As the electron pass along, they jump a proton across the membrane, creating a gradient. Can you explain that part?
Sure. As electrons move through the chain, they power proton pumps. These pumps move protons, H plus, from the stroma into the thylakoid space, creating a high concentration inside. This proton gradient is like a battery. The only way for protons to flow back is through ATP synthase. As they rush back, this enzyme spins and uses that energy to make ATP from ADP. So the proton gradient directly drives ATP production.
What was the meaning of this gradient that you are talking about?
A gradient just means there's a difference in concentration. Inside the thylakoid, we build up lots of protons, so it's crowded in there, while outside in the stroma, it's less crowded. This difference, or gradient, stores potential energy. When protons flow back down that gradient, from high concentration to low, through ATP synthase, that's what powers ATP production.
So, gradient just a difference in concentration inside the thylakoid. We just have a lot of protons, so it's crowded in there, while outside in the stroma, it's less crowded. The difference or the gradient stored potential energy when proton flow back down the gradient from higher to lower through ATP synthesis. Oh, that's power the ATP production.
You got it. As protons flow back through ATP synthase, that enzyme uses the energy to convert ADP into ATP, the cell's energy currency. That ATP is then ready to fuel all kinds of processes like the Kelvin cycle or anything the plant needs energy for. So that gradient is key to producing ATP.
So one thing is a little bit clear, and then what about?
I'm sorry.
So can you move next after the ATP and so ATP just they release energy in the form of ATP while the gradient thing is
Absolutely. Once ATP is produced, it's like a portable energy pack that the plant can use. The ATP and NADPH produced in the light reactions then fuel the Kelvin cycle, where carbon dioxide is fixed into sugars. Essentially, the energy from ATP and the reducing power from NADPH help build glucose and other carbohydrates. It's like a well coordinated energy flow that keeps the plant running and growing.
what about this NADPH that help us? Can you explain that part?
Of course, NADPH is essentially an energy carrier, like a rechargeable battery. In the light reactions, it's formed when electrons are transferred to NADP+, reducing it to NADPH. Then in the Kelvin cycle, NADPH provides the high energy electrons needed to reduce carbon dioxide into glucose and other carbohydrates. In other words, NADPH is the reducing power that helps drive the synthesis of sugars, making it a crucial part of the entire process.
It's an energy carrier like an rechargeable battery. In the light reaction, it's formed when electrons are transferred to NADPH, reducing it to NADPH. Then, in the Kelvin cycle, NADPH provides the high energy electrons needed to reduce carbon dioxide into glucose.
Exactly. It's that flow of energy and electrons that keeps everything moving smoothly. NADPH really is essential for turning carbon dioxide into the organic compounds that the plant needs. It's like the perfect partnership with ATP, making photosynthesis such an amazing and efficient process.
What next? These two things are clear, and then what next?
Once ATP and NADPH are available, the plant moves on to the Calvin cycle, where these energy carriers drive the fixation of carbon dioxide. Through a series of enzyme mediated steps, carbon dioxide is incorporated into a three carbon molecule, eventually leading to the formation of glucose and other carbohydrates. And from there, the plant can store energy, grow, and sustain itself. So the next step is really that intricate carbon fixation and sugar synthesis.
Once ATP and NADPH are available, the plant moves on to the Calvin cycle where these energy carriers drive the fixation of CO2. Through a series of enzyme mediated steps, CO2 is incorporated into three carbon molecules, eventually leading to the formation of glucose and other carbohydrates. And from there, the plant can store energy, grow, and sustain itself. So, the next step is really intricate CO carbon fixation and sugar synthesis. What was that?
Exactly. In the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is first fixed into a three carbon molecule called 3 phosphoglycerate, 3-PGA, by the enzyme Rubisco. Then ATP and NADPH are used to convert 3-PGA into another three carbon compound called G3P. Some of the G3P molecules are then used to regenerate the starting molecule, ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate, RUBP, while others are used to form glucose and other carbohydrates. It's a continuous cycle that ultimately builds up the plant's energy reserves and sustains growth.
This was very heavy. Can you explain in a very intuition?
Of course, at its core, the Kelvin cycle is like a factory assembly line. First, the plant grabs carbon dioxide and combines it with a starting molecule. Then, using the energy from ATP and the electrons from NADPH, it gradually transforms that carbon dioxide into sugars. It's a step by step process of building up simple molecules into something more complex and energy rich. So, in a nutshell, it's all about using energy to turn carbon dioxide into food for the plant.
And what was the product that plant uses and utilizes it like CO2 into food for the plant?
The main product the plant makes is glucose, which is a simple sugar. The plant uses glucose as a source of energy and as a building block for growth. It can store glucose as starch for later use and can also use it to produce other carbohydrates like cellulose, which helps build its structure. Essentially, glucose is the plant's main food, and it fuels everything from growth to reproduction.
So once the food is sugar, what is glucose is made, then where does it stored? Does it stored automatically?
Yes, exactly. Once glucose is made, the plant can store it in a couple of ways. One common way is by converting glucose into starch, which is a polysaccharide and can be stored in various parts of the plant, like roots, stems, or seeds. Another way is by converting glucose into cellulose, which helps build the plant cell walls. So the plant has built in storage systems to keep that energy ready for when it needs it.
Okay, you mentioned about this converting glucose into cellulose.
Yes, exactly. The plant can take glucose and link it together in long chains to form cellulose, which is a structural component of the plant's cell walls. This cellulose provides strength and rigidity, helping the plant maintain its shape and structure. It's a fascinating way that plants use simple sugars, not just for energy, but also for building their own structures.
What are the pathways it follows?
So when glucose is made, the plant can channel it through different pathways. One major pathway is storage as starch, which is basically a long-term energy reserve stored in organs like roots and seeds. Another pathway is the synthesis of cellulose, which we mentioned, and that's used to build cell walls. The plant can also convert glucose into other sugars like sucrose, which is transported throughout the plant to provide energy where it's needed. So essentially, glucose can be stored, used for structural purposes, or transported to different parts of the plant depending on what it needs.
So what we have talked now till now, can you list out and
Absolutely. Here's a summary of what we've covered. Photosynthesis overview. We talked about how plants capture sunlight using chlorophyll, exciting electrons and creating energy. Light reactions. We explored how excited electrons move through the electron transport chain in the thylakoid membrane, generating ATP and NADPH and creating a proton gradient. Three, proton gradient and ATP production. We went through how the proton gradient powers ATP synthase to produce ATP. For Calvin cycle, we discussed how ATP and NADPH are used in the Calvin cycle to fix carbon dioxide into sugars like glucose. Storage and utilization, we talked about how plants store glucose as starch and use it to build structural components like cellulose or transport it as sucrose. Overall pathways, we covered how glucose can be stored, used for energy, or used to build structures depending on the plant's needs. That pretty much sums up our journey through photosynthesis.
Anything else that is discuss at the higher level that we miss to discuss? Because I think we discuss very basic, very basic.
Absolutely. We definitely scratched the surface. At a deeper level, we could delve into things like the regulation of photosynthesis, the different types of photosynthesis like C3, C4, and CAM pathways, the role of different pigments beyond chlorophyll, and even the impact of environmental factors like light intensity and temperature. We could also explore how photosynthesis interacts with other metabolic pathways or even how it's adapted in different plant species. There's a whole rich complexity behind the basics.
So let's start with the first that you suggested. We can start with the regulation of photosynthesis.
Sounds great. The regulation of photosynthesis is pretty fascinating. It involves multiple layers of control, including one enzyme regulation. Key enzymes like Rubisco, which fixes carbon dioxide, are regulated by factors like light, pH, and the availability of substrates. Two, light intensity and quality. Plants can adjust their light harvesting complexes to optimize energy absorption and protect themselves from excess light. Stomatal regulation, the opening and closing of stomata control the intake of carbon dioxide and the release of oxygen, balancing water loss and gas exchange. Feedback mechanisms, the plant can sense the levels of ATP and NADPH and adjust the Calvin cycle accordingly, preventing over-reduction or overproduction. Five, hormonal control, plant hormones like auxins, gibberellins, and abscisic acid can influence photosynthesis by affecting enzyme activity or stomatal behavior. There's a lot of intricate regulation that ensures photosynthesis runs smoothly and efficiently.
Oh, that's a first enzyme regulation, like enzymes like RUBISCO, which fixes CO2, regulates by factor like light, pH, and availability of substrate. So light intent.
Exactly. For instance, Rubisco's activity can be influenced by the light conditions because light affects the pH inside the chloroplast and the concentration of certain molecules. When light is present, the pH increases and that helps activate Rubingo. Also, the availability of substrates like carbon dioxide and ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate can drive or slow down the enzyme's activity. It's a finely tuned system that ensures the plant adapts to its environment optimally.
And next is intensity and quality and stomata regulation, like opening and closing of stomata control the intake of COT and the release of oxygen, balancing water loss and gas exchange feedback mechanism, like the plant sense the level of ATP and NADPH can adjust the Calvin cycle automatically, preventing over reduction or overproduction. Hormonal control, plant hormones like auxin. Uh,
Exactly, you've got it. Plant hormones like auxins, gibberellins, and abscisic acid indeed play a big role in regulating photosynthesis. For example, abscisic acid can signal stomatal closure during drought conditions to reduce water loss, while auxins and gibberellins can influence growth and the plant's overall response to light and environmental cues. All these factors work together to fine tune how effectively a plant carries out photosynthesis. It's a beautifully interconnected system.
but who regulates all those things? Actually, I thought there are many things happening by its nature, or what? Who controls that? From light ray coming, how it will take intensity, and then what amount of oxygen energy and intake and outtake, and the opening and closing energy get transferred.
It's a wonderful blend of intrinsic and extrinsic regulation. At the core, plants have built in biochemical pathways and feedback mechanisms that automatically adjust enzyme activities and metabolic rates. For example, rubisco's activity is naturally regulated by the availability of light and CO2, and plants have sensory systems that detect light intensity and quality. On top of that, plants respond to environmental cues through signaling pathways. For instance, when light intensity changes, photoreceptors in the plant perceive that and trigger adjustments in the light harvesting complexes and even stomata behavior. In essence, it's a combination of the plant's own internal regulatory mechanisms and its ability to sense and respond to the environment, creating a harmonious balance.
Okay, it's a wonderful intrinsic and extrinsic regulations. Okay, that regulation is happens inherent or so it's a actually concentration level thing, or it's a biochemical pathway that controls it, and the feedback mechanism.
Exactly. It's both intrinsic and extrinsic. On one hand, the plant has built in biochemical pathways and feedback loops that help regulate enzyme activity and metabolite levels. For example, the concentration of ATP in NADPH can directly influence the Calvin cycle. On the other hand, the plant can also respond to external cues like light intensity, temperature, and water availability. So it's a dynamic interplay between the plant's internal mechanisms and the environment, ensuring that photosynthesis stays balanced and efficient. It's really a remarkable system.
So we talked about this thing, and you mentioned about different type of photosynthesis like C3, C4, and CAM pathways, the role of different pigments beyond chlorophyll, and the impact of environment factor like intensity and temperature.
Absolutely. Each type of photosynthesis, C3, C4, and CAM, has its own unique adaptations. For instance, C3 photosynthesis is the most common and works well in cool, moist environments. C4 photosynthesis, on the other hand, is a adaptation found in plants in hot, sunny climates, helping them minimize photorespiration. CAM plants like cacti open their stomata at night to reduce water loss, storing CO2 for use during the day. Beyond chlorophyll, plants also have accessory pigments like carotenoids and phycobilins, which help capture light energy across different wavelengths and protect the plant from damage. And then environmental factors like light intensity, temperature, and even humidity play a huge role in how effectively photosynthesis happens. All these factors and adaptations work together to help plants thrive in their specific environments. It's really fascinating.
So you mentioned about C3, C4, and CAMP has unique adaptations. Like what was that C3, C4, and CAMP?
Sure, here's a quick rundown. C3 photosynthesis. This is the most common pathway, and it occurs in cooler, wetter environments. In C3 plants, the first stable product of carbon fixation is a three carbon compound, 3-phosphoglycerate. However, C3 plants can suffer from photorespiration when it's hot and dry, which makes it less efficient under those conditions. C4 photosynthesis, this adaptation helps plants thrive in hot, sunny environments. C4 plants initially fix carbon dioxide into a four carbon compound, which is then shuttled to specialized cells where the Calvin cycle happens. This separation helps minimize photorespiration, and makes the process more efficient in high temperatures. CAM photosynthesis, this is found in plants in arid conditions like cacti. CAM plants open their stomata at night to take in CO2, and then store it as an organic acid. During the day, when the stomata are closed to conserve water, the stored CO2 is released and used in the Calvin cycle. This adaptation helps them conserve water while still performing photosynthesis efficiently. Each of these pathways is a remarkable adaptation to the plant's environment, showcasing the incredible diversity of nature.
So it's a pathway that happens in different plants.
Exactly. Different plants have evolved these distinct pathways to optimize their photosynthesis based on their environment. So C3 plants are typically found in cooler, wetter climates, while C4 plants thrive in hot, sunny conditions. CAM plants are perfect for arid environments where water conservation is crucial. Is really a testament to how plants adapt to their specific habitats.
Uh, okay, can you give a very strong conclusion?
Absolutely. In essence, photosynthesis is a beautifully complex and adaptive process that plants have fine tuned over millions of years. Through various pathways like C3, C4, and CAM, plants have adapted to thrive in different environments, from cool and moist to hot and arid. The intricate regulation of enzymes, pigments, and environmental responses ensures that plants can efficiently capture and convert solar energy into chemical energy, sustaining not just themselves, but also the entire ecosystem, is a remarkable testament to nature's ingenuity and adaptability.
Okay, thank you.